The wind howled like a wounded animal as Grace Miller pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The road ahead was narrow and slick with rain, winding up into the Appalachian Mountains where the town of Blackhollow lay tucked away like a secret long forgotten. The email had been short. No details, no signature, just a scanned photo of a man hanging from a tree, mouth stitched shut, and one line typed beneath, "The first is dead. You'll find the rest." It was the kind of thing most journalists would ignore, but Grace wasn't most journalists. She clicked her phone screen off and glanced toward the passenger seat. Tom Rourke sat still, his eyes on the road. "You still sure about this?" he asked, voice low but steady. Grace gave him a side glance. "You're the one who said you miss field work." I said, "I miss bar fights and small-time dealers, not backwater towns with corpses hanging from trees." She smiled faintly. "That's what makes it fun." They shared a small laugh, warm, easy, the kind that only old friends could share. Grace had known Tom since university, when he was cocky and untouchable, and she was too stubborn for her own good. Years had passed. He joined the force, then left under unclear circumstances. She'd become a journalist for the Sentinel, chasing stories no one else wanted. Now, they were on their way to a place where no one asked for them. Blackhollow. It was smaller than she expected. A faded wooden sign greeted them as they crossed into town. "Welcome to Blackhollow, the ST 1891, the paint peeling like dead skin." The trees were dense, their limbs twisted unnaturally. Fog hung low, clinging to the narrow streets like something alive. Tom parked the car in front of what looked like a general store. There wasn't a soul in sight. "Creepy enough for you," he muttered. "Almost charming," Grace said, stepping out. The air smelled like rain and rotting leaves. Inside the store, they found the first real face, an old woman behind the counter, skin like worn parchment, watching them with wary eyes. "Don't get many visitors," she said without greeting. "We're looking for Sheriff Green," Grace said. She didn't respond, just stared. Tom leaned in. "We heard about a death. Strange circumstances. The man from the email, his name was David Haynes." The woman's mouth twitched. "David's dead. Should have stayed away." That was all she said before disappearing into the back. They left the store in silence. "This place doesn't like questions," Tom said. "That makes it the perfect place for a story." They found the sheriff near the edge of town, at the base of the tree from a photo. The body had been taken down, but the scarred bark and blood-stained grass remained. Sheriff Harold Green was a wide-shouldered man with a stiff jaw and tired eyes. "I figured someone would come snooping," he muttered. Grace showed her press badge. "I just want the truth." "No truth here," Green said. "Just death." They talked for 10 minutes. That was all he'd give them. He refused to answer anything directly, but Grace noticed something strange in his tone, like he was afraid of more than just outsiders. As they returned to the car, Grace saw something in the trees. A figure, cloaked in black, watching. By the time she turned fully, it was gone. "What did you see?" Tom asked, following her eyes. "Nothing," she lied. "Probably just a bird." But her stomach turned, because it wasn't just a bird. It was watching. Watching was all it ever did, silently, patiently, like a predator that already knew how the story would end. That night, they booked a room at the Only Inn in Blackhollow, a creaky old Victorian house converted into a 3-room lodge. The owner, a woman named Nora, greeted them with brittle politeness and cold coffee. "You hear about the hanging?" she asked abruptly. Grace and Tom exchanged a glance. "Not officially," Tom said. Nora leaned in. "Don't stay long. This town has its ways." She left before they could ask more. In the room, Grace set up her laptop and began reviewing notes. David Haynes had lived alone on the edge of the woods. Former teacher. No criminal record. Nothing notable, except the stitch mouth. "Who does that?" she whispered aloud. "Why sew his mouth shut?" Tom sat on the windowsill, staring out at the dark street, to keep him from saying something. Or someone. Grace turned to him. "You really think it's a cult?" "I think it's a town hiding something," he said. "And those always end in either blood or fire." Outside, the wind howled again. A branch scraped the window. Then something else. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Tom jumped up and yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. He opened the door. The hallway was empty, except for a single dead crow, its eyes gouged out, lying on the doormat. Grace stared at it, chilled. Message received, she whispered. Tom shut the door and locked it. They barely slept that night, because watching them wasn't enough of the dead, and the wind would carry their name. That was what Grace remembered reading once. Scrawled on a torn piece of paper inside an old asylum, in another state, another lifetime. But here, in Blackhollow, the wind didn't carry names. It carried warnings. The next morning, Grace and Tom headed out toward the edge of town, walking the narrow path that led to David Haynes' house. The road soon turned into a trail, narrowing as it entered the woods. The house stood at the forest's edge, a single-story structure with gray wooden siding. The windows were dark. The door stood ajar. Tom tightened the gun at his hip. Doesn't look abandoned to me. Grace was the first to step inside. The interior was old, but tidy. A bowl of rotting fruit sat on the table. A chair lay toppled on the floor. But something else caught her attention. A symbol drawn in chalk in the center of the room. A pentagon within a circle, with markings at each point. An eye, a bird, a key, a mouth, and fire. What is this? Grace knelt to examine it. Some kind of ritual circle? Tom stayed silent. Grace moved toward a bookshelf in the corner. Among the dusty tomes, one looked unusually new. Voices from beneath, the hollow gospel. Inside the front cover, a chilling passage was handwritten. Give a name, and the shape becomes its own. Show it its place, and it will find the earth. So shut the mouths, silence the tongues. The one from shadow walks among us. Grace's chest tightened. This wasn't a warning. It was an instruction. Just then, a scream echoed from outside. Tom rushed out, Grace close behind. They reached the forest edge and found a woman's body face down on the ground. A local, the young woman who worked at Nora's cafe. Her body was lifeless. And yes, just like David Haynes, her mouth had been sewn shut. Tom stepped back, fist clenched. It's starting again. Grace turned to him. What do you mean again? Tom hesitated. I've seen this before, he said. Years ago, but the case was closed. Everyone moved on. Grace narrowed her eyes. You told me you were just an old friend and a former cop. Tom didn't respond. His face was drawn, pale with tension, as if speaking of the past might rip the present wide open. Grace turned toward the woods. Something moved in the shadows between the trees. This time, it didn't flee. It wanted to be seen, and it seemed to whisper, call us by our name. The town was starting to speak. And it will find you. That line echoed in Grace's mind as she stared into the woods, where something had moved. No, watched them. The figure had been too far to see clearly, but it wasn't human. Not entirely. And worst of all, it hadn't tried to run. It had wanted her to see it. Back in the town center, the mood had shifted. Doors were locked. Curtains drawn. The handful of people they passed turned their eyes down or crossed the street. It wasn't just fear. It was complicity. They're hiding something, Grace said as she and Tom returned to the inn. They've been hiding something for years, Tom muttered. She glanced at him. That body, you said this has happened before? Tom was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Back when I was still on the force. I got called to a small place in Oregon, not unlike this. For people went missing all within a week. The only thing we found was a church basement, empty, except for a circle carved into the floor. Same symbols as today. Grace stopped walking. You never told me that. Tom looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I didn't want to remember it. They reached the inn. Nora wasn't at the front desk. Her absence sent a chill through the air. Grace stepped behind the desk, calling her name. Nothing. Then she saw the note. Folded once, written in red ink. He waits below. What the hell is this? Grace asked. Tom frowned. Where's the basement in this place? They found it behind a narrow door at the end of the hall, half hidden. The kind of door you'd ignore unless you were looking. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended. The basement smelled of damp wood, mold, and something metallic. Blood. In the center of the floor, another chalk circle. And beside it, Nora, tied to a chair, mouth sewn shut, her eyes still moving. She wasn't dead. Grace ran to her, horror flooding her chest. We need to cut her loose. Tom pulled a knife from his boot and began sawing through the rope. That's when Nora's body began to shake, violently, like something inside her was trying to get out. She made muffled, frantic sounds, not groans of pain, but of warning. The chalk circle on the ground began to smoke, and from beneath it, something started to rise. Something calling its name, the hollow, and it will answer. Smoke curled from the chalk lines as the floor seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs beneath the wood. Grace stumbled back, choking on the sulphurous air. Tom stood frozen, knife still in hand, as Nora convulsed in the chair. Then came the voice, not from Nora, not from either of them, from the circle. You called, now open the gate. The words came not as sound but as vibration, shaking the very marrow of their bones. No, Tom muttered, backing away. No, this isn't possible. Grace grabbed him. What the hell is happening? What gate? Before he could answer, Nora let out a wet, tearing sound, her body lurching forward. The threads keeping her mouth closed snapped, not from being cut, but from pressure inside. Black fluid oozed from her lips, dripping onto the chalk. The circle flared bright red, then vanished. The air went still. Nora collapsed forward, dead. Tom was trembling. You knew, Grace whispered. You've seen this before. Tom didn't deny it. I was part of the task force assigned to investigate similar deaths. 10 years ago, there was always a ritual, always a circle, and always one survivor who'd lost their mind. Grace stared at him. Then why the hell didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was done, he snapped. I thought we stopped it. They both looked at Nora's ruined body. They hadn't. Later that night, back in their room, Grace studied the symbols she had copied from the first circle. Her laptop pinged as she matched one to a forbidden sect once referenced in fringe religious studies, a group called a Hollow Veil. It was believed to be long gone, a group that worshipped not a god, but a hunger, not death, but the emptiness that followed. Tom sat silently beside her. You're not telling me everything, she said without looking up. I've told you enough. No, she said, turning. You've told me what happened, not why it followed you here. He met her eyes, and for a moment, Grace saw something behind him she didn't recognize. Fear, but also familiarity. You think I brought this, he said softly. I think it's not a coincidence that every time you're near one of these places, people die. Tom didn't respond. Outside, the wind howled again. But this time it wasn't alone. There were footsteps and chanting, low, rhythmic, in a language that tasted like rust. The hollow was waking, and it knew their names. Written in blood have power. That's what the old text said. The ones Grace had read late into the night, back in college, when she thought the occult was just theater and myth. Now, huddled in the candle-lit room with Tom, those myths pressed close, breathing down her neck. The chanting outside grew louder. Dozens of voices. Unified. Controlled. Tom moved toward the window, rifle raised. They're in the square, he said. Grace peeked through the cracked curtain. Figures in black robes surrounded the old fountain at the center of town. Torches flickered in the fog. One of the robed shapes raised a hand, and the others fell silent. The leader stepped forward. A pale mask. No eyes. No mouth. Only holes. From beneath the robe, they held up a parchment, soaked in something dark, and spoke. In the name of the one beneath, we cleanse. We silence. We consume. The crowd responded in unison. So shall the hollow be fed. Grace's heart pounded. They know we're here, she said. Tom turned. Then we hit first. They left the inn through the back, using side alleys to move undetected. The town was a maze of crumbling stone, twisting vines, and fog that clung to skin like oil. Every corner whispered. Every window watched. They made their way to the old chapel. It stood taller than any other building, its bell tower leaning slightly like a finger beckoning judgment. The door groaned as Tom pushed it open. Inside was silence, too complete to be natural. And then, a whisper, Grace's name. She spun, flashlight shaking. Nothing, until her beam caught a symbol above the altar. The same chalk circle as before, this time burned into the wood. But instead of 5 symbols, there were now 6. The 6th was a face. Her face, drawn in exact, horrifying detail. Tom stepped beside her. His expression didn't shift. He didn't look surprised. Grace turned to him, a sick feeling growing in her gut. Why is my face here? Tom didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any scream. Nothing, trust no one. That was a lesson Grace could no longer ignore. As Sheriff Green's blood spread like ink across the chapel floor, Grace slowly backed away, eyes never leaving Tom. He hadn't spoken since Green's final words. She broke the silence. He said, "You brought this back." He looked at you like you were part of it. Tom finally looked at her. He was scared. "You saw what this place does. It gets inside you." She shook her head. "That's not a denial." Tom stepped forward, voice low. "We came here together, Grace. Don't let this place turn you against me." But it already had, because deep down she remembered things now. Flashes of college days. Tom disappearing for weeks. Coming back quieter. More intense. The way he always avoided questions about his time after the force. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. Quietly. "Recording now." "We need to leave," she said. Tom nodded. "Agreed? But not before we go back to David Haynes' house. We miss something." "You sure?" she asked. "Yes," he said without blinking. "I know what I'm looking for now." David Haynes' house was even colder the second time. Grace moved cautiously, staying behind Tom as he entered. The chalk circle in the living room had been smudged, erased by someone, or something, in the bedroom. They found a trapdoor under the bed. Tom didn't hesitate. He opened it and climbed down. Grace followed. What they found beneath the floor wasn't just a basement. It was a shrine. Hundreds of papers nailed to wooden beams. All of them showing names, first names, last names, some crossed out violently. Symbols were drawn in ash and dried blood. Candles had burned down to wax puddles. In the center, a stone pedestal with a single object on top. A mask, black, no features, just smooth, glistening stone. Grace stepped closer and saw her own name, carved into the wall behind the pedestal. "Tom," her voice cracked. He said nothing. She turned and saw that he was no longer standing beside her. He was standing in front of the pedestal, hands outstretched, reverent, like a priest before God. Is not the right word for what lived beneath blackhollow. Grace didn't believe in God, not in the traditional sense, but even she felt the oppressive presence in that dark room. It clung to the stone walls like grease. It hummed in the marrow of her bones. And in front of her stood Tom, his hand just inches from the smooth black mask. "Don't," Grace said. Her voice trembled. Tom stepped away. He turned, slowly, calmly, like he'd expected her to follow. "I didn't want you to come this far," he said, "but I knew you would." "Why?" she whispered. "Why bring me here? Why lie?" "I never lied," he said. "Not about the friendship, not about the hollow. I just didn't tell you everything." Her eyes narrowed. "You're part of them." "I was," he admitted. "I left, or I thought I did. But this thing, this emptiness, it doesn't let go. It waits. It shapes. It calls." Grace backed toward the ladder. Tom didn't move to stop her. "You were always the curious one," he said. "They chose me to bring you because they knew you'd dig deeper than anyone else. They needed someone who would truly see." "You're insane," she hissed. He stepped closer to the mask. "You still don't understand. This isn't about worship. It's about restoration." "Restoration of what?" Tom looked at her, and for the first time, his face didn't look like Tom's anymore. There was something behind his eyes. Something ancient. Something hollow. Of the silence. Grace scrambled up the ladder and ran, not looking back. Outside, the air had changed. The sky above Black Hollow had turned the color of bruised flesh. The townspeople were gathering again, this time in complete silence. No chants, no movement, just staring. At her, she ran, through the woods, past the broken sign, toward the only car still working. And as she drove away, her phone buzzed. A message, a known number, Grace Miller, the final name. And then the engine died. That's all Grace could think. Her body screamed for action, for escape. But the trees around the car were closing in, not by wind or storm, but by some ancient unseen force. Their trunks creaked like ribs cracking under pressure. Bark split open to reveal soft, wet folds beneath. The forest was alive and it wanted her. Grace kicked the door open and stumbled into the mud. She ran. Branches clawed at her jacket. Thorns bit into her legs. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The hollow, whatever it was, had chosen her, and she would not let it have her without a fight. Behind her, the forest whispered, not words, names. Grace, Grace, Grace. She burst through the edge of the woods and into the open grave of Black Hollow. The town was empty. Everyone was gone, except for one person, standing in the middle of the square. Tom. He wore the mask now, not held in his hands, but fused to his face. "Welcome back," he said. His voice was layered, not just his own, but others behind it. Hundreds, thousands. Acquire the dead and forgotten. "This isn't real," Grace said. "You're not Tom anymore." "Oh, I am," he said, stepping closer. "I always was. But now, I'm complete." She raised her phone and hit play, the recording she'd made back in the chapel. "If I die," she whispered, "they'll know what you did." Tom laughed. The sound didn't echo. "Let them come," he said. "We'll be waiting." The ground beneath her feet began to crack, glowing red. And then she realized this wasn't about her death. It was about rebirth. "The hollow isn't a place," Tom said. "It's a seed. And you, Grace, were the soil." With one final roar, the earth split beneath her, and everything went black. Epilogue. Silence. The world thinks Black Hollow burned in a forest fire. No survivors. No answers. But 2 weeks later, a recording surfaced online. A woman's voice. Panicked. Breathless. "This is Grace Miller. If you're hearing this, don't come to Black Hollow. Don't believe what they say. It's not gone. It's not over. The message cuts out, but not before one last whisper is heard. A man's voice. She screamed so sweetly, and the trees on either side of the road began to move.